Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Hi, and welcome back. When you think of unlocking brain health, what do you think of? When I think of it, I didn't think of time-restricted eating. What does that even mean? Well, fortunately, we're about to find out together. I'm excited to welcome back Dr. Teryn Clarke, who's going to explain what this is and how it helps our brain functionality. I've had Dr. Clarke on a couple different times before over the past few years, and I'm really excited that she has agreed to be a regular guest contributor to the podcast. She's written a new book called Brain Health Action Plan, and in it she describes a lot of the ways that you can take simple actions to help build your brain health. And I'm excited to go on this journey with her and with all of you. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Teryn Clarke. Well, Dr. Teryn Clarke, welcome back to the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and your listeners.
So I am super excited. And like I mentioned in the intro to the audience, I'm really excited about, like we were saying before we started recording, is this new season for the show, because you're going to be a regular guest on now talking about brain health. And this is, I think, the 3rd time you've been on, but now it's going to be a little bit more frequent, along with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette, who's going to be our therapist expert. So to have somebody of your caliber on the neurology side, the brain side of health, and having her on the therapy side of mental health, I think the audience is going to get, a lot out of our conversations. And part of what we're going to start talking about are these, I think, interesting topics that either myself or the audience probably has never heard of, that you talk about in your new book, which is called Brain Health Action Plan. And as we move along in our conversations, we're going to kind of pick apart different areas of the book. But today you brought up this interesting topic that I never heard of, and it's called time-restricted eating. And so I'll turn it over to you now to kind of set this up, what it means, what it is, and how it affects our brain health. Because I think I'm halfway through reading your book right now, which just came out. So I'll put a link to the audience. I'll put a link to Dr. Clarke's book in the show notes. But, I love this tagline. I'm going to read it. It's simple, science-based lifestyle changes that optimize cognitive fitness and reduce Alzheimer's risk. And I know that you have a really personal story behind Alzheimer's. So I can't wait for you to share that with the audience as well. But yeah, so talk to us about what is time-restricted eating and how does it impact our brain?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. As you know, I'm I'm hyper focused, in fact, on preventative brain health. And I think it's overall a really important topic for all of us who are in midlife, and especially for your listeners who are planning for the retirement. And when we think about, planning for the future, it's really all for naught if we don't have our brain health. So as they're thinking about, saving for retirement, planning, setting their financial goals, I think it's really important to also set health goals. And of course, I think brain health is the highest of all of those. And the good news about focusing on brain health, it's wealth that pays dividends in all your body systems. So one of the interventions that I think is so powerful, or one of the lifestyle choices that we can make, is time-restricted eating. And so your listeners may or may not have heard of it. It's a version of fasting, which, don't plug your ears now, because I feel like that really turns people off, because they hear fasting and they think of feeling deprived and feeling hangry. And it's a lifestyle change that we can incorporate with actually very little feelings of deprivation and hunger. And it's one of the most powerful lifestyle changes in terms of brain health and in terms of general health. So just to kind of explain, to be on the same page about what the background is of what happens when you stop eating at the end of the day, rather. So if we go back to ancient humans and early mankind, we used to be hunters and gatherers, and we generally ate for maybe 4 to 6 hours a day. And the rest of that 24-hour period, we were not eating. And our genes are really geared towards that lifestyle, where we're eating for a minority of the day and effectively fasting for the majority of the day. And where we are now is that most of us are only fasting or not eating when we're sleeping. And our waking hours are generally eating throughout that period and taking in calories. So time-restricted eating is incorporating what our body is really still built to do, because our food supply changed way more rapidly than our genes can keep up with. So trying to get ourselves certainly away from eating the majority of a 24-hour period and back to eating a minority of a 24-hour period. So when we talk about what happens after we finish eating for the day, so let's say we stop eating, we finish dinner at 7:00, and let's just say we don't take any other calories in. We don't have a glass of wine after dinner. We don't have dessert. Let's just say we're finishing dinner at 7. So the first couple hours, your body will run on the calories you consumed in that last meal, and then those will run out. And then you switch over to running on sugar calories that were stored in your liver throughout the day. And that's called glycogen. It is effectively a liver stored sugar. So your body will switch over to living on liver sugar for 10 to 14 hours after you stop eating. So because when you're sleeping, you still have metabolic processes going in your body. You still need calories. You still need fuel. So you run on that for a certain amount of hours. And then after you burn through all that liver sugar, then you get to what is called ketosis. That's the process of burning fats that are stored in your body. And that's
I was just going to ask, when does that happen? I forgot the key word of that, but I was curious, when does that happen?
Yeah, that doesn't happen till probably 10 to 14 hours after you stop taking in any kind of carbohydrate.
That
calories.
Seems like a really long time.
It is a really long time. So you can imagine that if you have a dessert at 9:00 at night, and then you wake up and you're eating at 7, the odds of you ever getting to burning fat are pretty low. And that's the concept behind the ketogenic diet. People are trying to just stay in fat burning all the time by not taking in carbohydrate calories, which is kind of a tangent. And we could always talk about that another time. But the beauty of what happens in terms of your body and your brain health when you get to fat burning and when you get a break from sugar calories is that you get to reset your sensitivity to insulin. So we need to switch a little bit and talk about what having constant availability of sugar calories does to our body and our brain. So if we're leading a typical American lifestyle, which has probably too much processed foods in it, and those are loaded with sugars, even things like wheat bread, that can have 5 grams of sugar in a slice, which is more than an Oreo cookie, by the way.
Wow,
But all of this,
that's really interesting.
yeah, if you look, especially there's one brand, I don't want to say the brand, but it's like a dude with a guitar. A lot of his wheat breads, which I thought would be healthy because he looks like somebody who does CrossFit to me. He's like totally buff. A lot of his wheat breads are packed with sugar, and I wouldn't have guessed it from the front label, but you'd only see it on the nutrition label. But so what's really happening with us having so much sugar throughout the day is that our body is seeing these spikes of sugar, and those are followed by a spike of insulin flooding our system to push the sugar into the cells so it can be used for energy and to get it out of the bloodstream, because it can't stay in the bloodstream. That's really unhealthy. So we're getting spikes of insulin throughout our day, just constantly. And after insulin does its job and pushes sugar into the cells, then the insulin is floating around in our system, and it has to be broken down before our body can dispose of it. So it's broken down by an enzyme called insulin degrading enzyme. And that seems really well named, right? I mean, that's exactly what it does. The problem is when scientists discovered that enzyme and named it, they didn't realize that it breaks down several different proteins. One of the important proteins it breaks down is something called amyloid. And if your listeners are interested in Alzheimer's disease or following it,
That's
they may
a big
know
one.
that, amyloid is one of the 2 main proteins that we find deposited in the brain on autopsy of people who died with Alzheimer's disease. So if we're flooding our system with sugar, then our body is flooding our bloodstream with insulin that has to get broken down. That insulin and amyloid are competing to get broken down by the same enzyme. And that enzyme has more of an affinity for insulin because of its size. So then our system's directing all of that enzyme to breaking down insulin, and amyloid can't get broken down to get excreted. And so it ends up getting deposited in our brain. So that's the direct connection between sugar and Alzheimer's disease. And so if we can, a big part of the book is cutting down sugar, which is important. But another part is giving ourselves a break during the 24-hour period from insulin so that our cells can reset and become sensitive again to insulin signaling. And that same thing happens in the brain. If our brain cells are overloaded by seeing insulin all the time, they become insensitive to it. And that's why sometimes people call Alzheimer's disease diabetes type 3, because it's very important to give our brains a break from sugar and insulin. That's really where we want to get. We want to get past all of the sugar from our last meal, through all of the sugar that our liver stored for us in a day. And we want to get to that point of living on the burned fats from our system. I mean, not only because it's great to burn fat, right? That's usually what we want for body composition, but it's really important for our brain and our body in general to just get a break from seeing insulin so that the next time we see it, we'll be sensitive to it, and it decreases our risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
So is that one reason why it's hard to, I don't know the word, to lose weight, but to burn the fat is because it's such a long cycle, that 10 to 12 hours potentially that you mentioned of the body working until it gets to the point where it actually starts burning that then?
Exactly. I mean, we can feel like we haven't eaten in a while, but when you understand the underlying physiology and what's going on with our metabolism, it's quite a long time to get to ketosis. And so that's why some people manage it by, just starving their body of carbohydrates to try to burn fat. But for me and most of my patients who I've worked with them on these lifestyle tweaks, it's easier to actually split apart your eating than to try to cut out whole groups of foods. A lot of us have found that, at least. Some people do ketosis and they do it well, but it's one of those diets where if you do any cheating, you're totally derailed, and then you have this kind of spring back to actually gaining more weight. So it's a really restrictive diet that there's no room for error on it. And so finding that with most of my patients, they find that paying more attention to when they eat makes a big improvement. And one of the things, I feel like one of the things that's maybe germane to our talk, because I think about it with brain health, is how do you know it's working? We're asking people to make changes for the future. And to me, it feels a lot like an IRA. I don't have, a
I was just
saving.
going to
I have to
say,
do my
like
own
when you
IRA
said
thing.
that, I'm like, it's not that much different than like asking people to save in a retirement account or a 529 for college or any type of savings plan.
Exactly. I mean, it's work and it's a little bit of sacrifice, right?
Right.
I'd rather
Yeah.
be spending that money on travel right now. But the difference, and the question is like, oh, well, what if I don't live to use all that money? Okay, but I'd rather have that opportunity than run out and
Right.
be destitute. So the difference is, though, I can log in and look at my retirement account anytime and see that it's growing and see how much is there. It's a little bit different than trying to bank future health in midlife. Because how do you measure that? Okay, I'm time restricted eating. I'm, eating less sugar. I'm one of the other interventions is eating less seed oils like canola and vegetable oil. And I think we're going to talk about that another date.
Yes.
But it's hard because you don't have the positive reinforcement of being able to look at it. And so the way you can measure if it's working right now, there's a couple surrogates that we can look at. One of them is that most people, when they really adopt these brain healthy habits, will see an improvement in body composition. So an increase in muscle, a loss in fat, so more definition. Another surrogate marker that people will see and be able to feel to measure that this is working is most people have improved focus. That's especially true of time restricted eating. When people are getting to ketosis, getting a break from the constant sugar to their brain, it does improve focus. So there are a couple
Teryn,
ways we can.
how does that measure? Like, how does one measure like the amount of focus like that?
It's hard to measure. Sometimes I can, if we do cognitive testing, I can measure an improvement
Okay.
in attention, but I wouldn't expect that most people are going to have a neuropsychiatric battery or a neuropsychological
Right.
battery for that. Just basically day to day feeling better, less fatigue, less brain fog, more focus, ability to get tasks done. I've had people describe it to me that they notice they have less piles around, meaning they sit down to do a task and they get through it to completion rather than having a lot of things halfway done. So that's one of the benefits. And we can talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of how to approach time restricted eating. I mean, I wish it didn't have restricted in the title because it really sounds kind of barbaric, but it isn't that bad with just a little mindfulness and awareness of how we're eating. So that's something we can talk about too if listeners want to start incorporating and trying to move towards an effective time restricted eating strategy.
So I'm curious when it comes, that's a good lead in my question, because when it comes to like developing a strategy of like when to eat and when not to eat, obviously like I've read where like, you don't want to eat past a certain time at night. It kind of probably goes back to what you've explained so far with, storing of the sugars. But is there, because like one thing that I've personally changed starting about almost a year ago, I changed my workout routine where rather than doing an elliptical workout, 4 or 5 days a week, I started rucking. And some of the listeners will know this because especially ones that live in my subdivision here in the state of Michigan, they see me. But it's really based off of this book by Michael Easter called The Comfort Crisis. I'm not sure if you read it or not.
I read that too. I loved it. Yes.
Yeah.
And I also ruck. And so it was a good reinforcement. I loved his book.
Yeah. And so part of what I took away, so that was like one of the main things I took away from Michael's book. But the other thing kind of leads into what we're talking about right now, which is so interesting. I didn't necessarily realize it had a name, was this time restricted eating. So what I did is I would find myself, I ate the same processed deli sandwich pretty much every day for lunch. And so what I stopped doing, I just stopped eating lunch. And it took a while to kind of get through those. I don't know if there is such thing as a word hunger pain. I was going to ask you about that as well. But I feel so much better not eating that during the day and then just kind of waiting until later in the day, maybe trying to have, I'll call it a healthy snack, but I'm not even sure if healthy is the right word before like dinner. So does that kind of go into this time restricted eating strategy, or is it to where it's more like don't eat past like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, depending on like when you go to bed?
That's a great question. There's a couple ways. There are a lot of actually ways to address time restricted eating. And that's one of them. And I think a lot of the focus improvement and things that you're noticing might also be from reduced calorie intake. And when we say that, I feel like we're going back to the 70s and like some of those diets of the 70s. And when I talk about caloric restriction, it's not really about counting calories. It's about overall eating less, because every study that's looked at longevity, lower calorie intake improves longevity. I mean, even when we look in a cellular level and we get to the telomeres, which is kind of like the shoestring ends on our chromosomes, it's a great topic. We know so much about it. And we are, as a society and as a world, well, not as a world, because some people are starving, but in developed nations, we are eating too many calories, way too many calories. So I think you're seeing a benefit from that. But by that, I don't mean like go count calories, because I think that's really not
I see that's the thing is I have really resisted that idea. Same way with like, if I tie this back to like financial planning, like budgeting, like most people would be shocked to hear me say that I hate the word in the process called budgeting, because it's not necessarily about, trying to figure out like, okay, I'm only going to spend $100 eating out, or I'm only going to spend $500 a month on groceries. It doesn't matter necessarily like where you're spending. It's your total amount that you're spending.
Yep.
And so does that need to come down? Same way with calories. It's like, I'm not really counting the calories and like maybe necessarily like what I'm eating, but am I just eating less? I guess.
Exactly. And that's why I hate even bringing up calories, but if you look at the studies on it, it's all under the rubric of caloric restriction in animal studies and human studies and observational studies. But yes, I agree. I would rather see people skipping things than like counting and being like, oh, I have, 200 less calories. Like that micromanagement, I agree. It's just like budgeting, and it's overall,
it doesn't work.
Totally
like eventually, like
forest.
You don't have the willpower to keep doing that.
No, I agree. So many times I've downloaded one of those apps on my phone where I'm like going to put everything on my budget in, and it lasts like 2 days. It's so tedious. So that's where I like the bigger picture, because it's easier to look at your day. You've dropped lunch, and that's fantastic. I mean, eating 2 meals a day, even when we look in dogs who eat kibble all at once, 1 meal a day versus 2, have a longevity benefit. So time restricted eating, caloric restriction, it all is tied together in terms of longevity, brain health, general health. So what I think, the hunger pains is one thing, and people may have them when they start. Kind of tying into your exercise in the morning, it's challenging because a lot of us, myself included, I find that exercise for me first thing in the morning is the best.
Yes,
I
agree.
I don't do like a CrossFit type thing. My husband does CrossFit. He can fast. He can do CrossFit in his fasting window most days, but some days he just can't. So he'll break with like a high protein, high fat, no carb kind of a breakfast. So he's not really breaking the fast as much because he's still not introducing carbohydrate calories. So he can still stay in the burning fat, but he really needs something in his stomach because he just can't make it.
Can I interrupt for a second? When you say carbohydrate calorie, what do you mean by that? Is that like the first thing I think of is like, is that like a sugar? Is that or
yeah, it's sugar or anything that turns immediately into sugar, like
which is
bread,
a carbohydrate
cereal.
does that. Like if you eat a piece of bread, that your body's going to break that down into a sugar, right?
Yeah, your body is set. Your metabolism is preferential to sugar calories or carbohydrate calories. So you will run in ketosis until your body sees sugar, and then it will immediately switch to sugar. So the minute you have carbohydrate calories, the fast is over. And so there's a couple different ways. So when I have people approach time restricted eating, my first approach is just get back to balance. Just decide that there's going to be a 12-hour window where you're eating and a 12-hour window when you're not eating. You really shouldn't have hunger pains during that time. I'm not sure you'll get to ketosis during that time, but it's just an absolute minimum because you don't want to still have liver sugar left over when you're already eating more sugar and starting your day. Like you're just never getting a break from sugar. We've got to get at least towards that. So that's something everybody can do. 12-12 doesn't require medical supervision. That's just a basic, like a no-brainer way we should be shifting. So, and that will usually end up cutting out, like when I started, because I wasn't doing this probably like hardcore seriously and really doing it most days unless there's like a social activity. Then it's just a day that I'm not doing it, and that's fine. I'm not obnoxious. I don't go to a party and be like, oh, I stopped eating at 7, like, whatever. I'm not going to tell everybody about my lifestyle because nobody wants to hear that at a party. So 12-12 is a good way to start. When I started with that, I already noticed that it cut out things like me snacking when I was making my kids' lunches at night, because it's so easy. Like you're putting grapes in and I'm just having some grapes. It's not a lot of sugar, but it's sugar. It's fruit sugar. And certainly I'm putting desserts in their lunch and snacking, or putting away, like sometimes I would do like noodles and stuff, and that's carbohydrates. Like I don't need at 9:00 at night to be having a snack of noodles that I'm putting in my kids' lunch. I just really don't. So it cut out a lot of that. It also, if you drink, after dinner, having a drink at night, it cut out wine. At that time I was drinking, I'm not now. Part of that had to do with the book that you mentioned about comfort, and part of it just had to do with research for this book. But that cut out a lot of nighttime calories that were pretty empty that I didn't need. So that can even be effective in that regard. And then from there, you go to either one of those sides. So if you're somebody who works out in the morning and you need some calories, trying to change those calories to protein or fat calories, like eggs would be a great breakfast. If you have to get some calories before you work out, you need something in your stomach. And you could always, make like egg muffin cups or something that you have in the fridge and you can just heat up and go. It doesn't have to be adding to your morning of cooking a meal before you go. So that's an option. But trying to stretch either way. So do you move dinner a little bit earlier because you can't move when you're going to break your fast and have breakfast? Or do you keep your dinner or meal calories ending at 7 and then start to try to push your morning later? If people have had the experience of missing breakfast and then realizing it's 2 p.m. and they never ate and they never got hungry, a lot of us have kind of that baseline feeling. They might be people who are going to be pretty successful pushing their breakfast, really breaking their fast at lunch instead of having a breakfast altogether. For me, I'm one of those people that if back in the day, if I woke up and I had an English muffin or like cake as breakfast, which is like a blueberry muffin, I would be starving an hour later and need to eat more. But if I didn't eat anything, I could easily get to lunch and not be particularly hungry. So
that's interesting, because like sometimes like when you eat something, you think, okay, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. But then like when you do eat, then like an hour later, like you mentioned, like you're hungry again, rather than if you would have just skipped it, it's kind of like you don't miss it.
Yeah. And it sounds weird, but if you are having like that empty stomach feeling, sometimes it's just empty stomach feeling and it's not truly hunger. And so what I try to do to get through that, to see, do I really need to eat or not, is have a big glass of water. Cause I'm super into carrying my, half gallon around all day. And a lot of times water will get you through that. It's just a sensation that your stomach doesn't have anything in it. And that's a good way to push through. I mean, all of these when you get beyond 12-12, of course, you have to talk to your doctor and be sure that your health situation is approved for 14 hours of not eating, 10 hours of eating, or a 15-9, which would be 9 hours of eating, 16-8, which is only 8 hours of eating. You have to run that by your doctor, and especially if you're taking medicines or have any health conditions. And so some people look more at, they'll just have a variable schedule, like, okay, it's 7:30 and I just finished eating, so I'm just going to keep in mind that I'm not going to eat, maybe they're doing a 14 till 9:30 tomorrow. Or some people, it's easier to say, I'm only going to eat between 10 and 7. And so I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to try to follow that. And then if it's a social thing and you have wine after that, or that's whatever. I just don't think you can be so dogmatic about it that you make yourself miserable. But having kind of either it's a general time frame, or it's a general, like, what your fasting window is going to be, and you kind of reset every day. For me, it's just been easier to say, I'm going to finish eating between 7 and 7:30, and I'm going to start eating sometime after 10:30 the next day. And so a lot of times I find it's 11:30 and I go, oh, okay, well, I guess if, I can eat now, but I just find I'm not waiting for 10:30. Actually, I'm not watching the clock because I drink black coffee, which I had to change to because I was a cream and sugar gal.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I never thought I would drink black coffee, but being able to drink black coffee or plain tea has made all the difference because I love coffee. And so I can have pretty much as much of it as I want. And that's made a difference. Couple tricks to get rid of that is to get rid of the sugar. I started with cinnamon. That really helped me cut down the sugar gradually and then get rid of it. Now I don't have cinnamon in there. I probably could. It has great health benefits, but I actually have a little bit of Himalayan salt in my coffee. That might sound weird, but it like takes away a little bit of edge of bitterness.
Okay.
And Himalayan salt is really good for us. Celtic salt is another great healthy salt. Like we actually probably need a little more salt in our lives. So that's made a big difference. But my body has really reset. And if I feel empty stomach feeling, I have water or tea or coffee. And, I kind of appreciate like, wow, I never felt hungry in the past. Like all of my, I would eat food and then an hour later be hungry. Really, it was just craving. I was coming off the sugar of that meal and I just wanted more sugar. And so I think all the interventions in the book dovetail with each other. They're all interconnected. But as I broke my sugar addiction, which in the book you'll read, I had quite a sugar addiction. I mean, I had addict behavior moving around town. The preview of that is it was related to Starbucks. Once I started to cut down the sugar addiction and break away from that, that was way more unpleasant than incorporating time restricted eating. So I think your listeners can do it. And I've just seen so much success in my patients and they're so happy with their eating schedule. And there's so many ways to tailor it. I mean,
I was just going to ask, like, it sounds like from what you've described so far, it's like you're going to have to give yourself some empathy to get started because you're going to have to try different things and see what works and see what doesn't work. And it's kind of like a trial and error, like until you really fine tune it to where, okay, yes, this works for me. Like in your example, like you got to the point where like 10:30, 11 o'clock or whatever it was, like you still weren't necessarily sometimes noticing that you hadn't eaten, that you weren't even hungry. But I'm sure it took time to do that. Just like you're breaking away from the sugar. I think people want or expect those like instant results. It's kind of like their portfolio and the equity markets. Like the biggest power of being in the markets is time and the power of compounding. I think this is probably similar. I think there's so much overlap, and that's why I'm so excited to have you on and have these conversations because there's so much overlap between the financial planning of what I do and the brain and neurology part of what you do. There's more overlap there than we think.
I totally agree. And I'd say, I think there's 3 things to keep in mind as your listeners are maybe incorporating some lifestyle changes. I mean, number 1, like you said, it's grace. Like give yourself grace. You paying attention to this and doing something about it is putting you head and shoulders ahead of most people who aren't even aware that they can do anything to change their brain health. And they're not really aware of what those interventions should be. So one of them is grace. Always forgive yourself. And I agree. If we go out too hard and fast, it's a recipe for disaster, like yo-yo dieting. It's not a diet. It's how we're going to live. It's how we're going to eat. And where it ties in with an IRA or a retirement account is the beauty of talking about this with your listeners who are, not faced with dementia, but earlier in life is you can make smaller choices earlier in life that are going to pay huge dividends later. I mean, your listeners know, and I don't really understand, but I've seen it where it's like, oh, here's the person who started saving $100 a month at 20, and they have, I don't know how many $1 million in their retirement, right? And then you look at somebody who started 10 years later at 30. It's night and day different. It's night and day different from midlife to, if you start really late, I would say, it's never too early or too late, but it's certainly a lot easier if you start early. Right. If you start saving your retirement at 65 or 60, and you got 5 years to save, $3 million, it's not possible.
Right.
So the beauty is the earlier you start, the more gentle you can be with yourself. You don't have to be super dramatic. You can make tiny changes, and those tiny changes are going to pay a big dividend because you've got that benefit of time, just like in your retirement account. So grace, doing it slowly. I think that's the reason that my clients and I have had success, because we're not doing this overnight. I mean, I remember we have some friends who we met through my husband's CrossFit gym. And I remember they were doing a super restricted, I want to say they had a 6-hour eating window. I remember when I first heard that, it just sounded like hell on earth. I couldn't do that. I mean, also like nothing social fits into that, like really nothing. Like, you really can't hardly have lunch with somebody. You certainly can't have dinner because you're done by 6. Nobody else eats by then. And I just remember thinking like it's brutal and barbaric. And so, but I started with 12. Like I started with like, I'm just not paying attention to when I stop eating or when I start. So I just started with paying attention. And then I pushed it a little bit and it was like, oh, it's already 7, but I'm just gonna have some water. I'm not hungry. And then it was 8. And then, the more gentle, gradual you are, the better it's going to work because you're changing the way you live. You're not adopting a diet for a month to see an effect. And this is another thing. You're going to look back in 2 or 3 months and go, oh yeah, oh my goodness, it's been like 15 hours. Like I'm kind of 15 hours on a lot of days. And some days I'm 14 hours between meals, last calories of the day and first calories of the morning. And I do feel better. And, I would encourage people, I'm not a believer in weight. I don't think it's a good surrogate for health at all. Also, BMI, I don't think is a surrogate because muscle weighs more than fat. And I've seen a lot of people who are technically obese, but they're like ripped muscle builders, like Olympic weightlifters. They're certainly not obese. So if you're going to make these health choices for your brain health and you kind of want to see how it affects your body composition over time, I would just encourage people to measure their waist. If you don't have much of a waist or a clear waist that you're going to measure again in 4 or 5 months, maybe just where your belly button is. And so you might see that over the months that you're incorporating some of these brain health habits that you do have a change in your waistline. That's going to be a more accurate reflection of how these might change your body composition. But I would even say unless people are weighing themselves to see their water weight because they have something like congestive heart failure or kidney problems, I really encourage people not to weigh themselves. I think it's kind of like that budgeting, that micromanagement minutia that you can get obsessed with, and it's not telling you the whole picture. So feel your focus, feel how effective you are at getting things done and off your desk, feel how present you are, and maybe measure your weight. But beyond that, I wouldn't really obsess on the other micro factors.
Well, I think that is a really good topic to wrap up this initial conversation. And I will want to remind the listeners that if you have questions that you want Dr. Clarke to answer, feel free to email those. We look at every email that comes through. And as we try this new season of working with not only Dr. Clarke, but you'll soon be introduced to Dr. Dragonette as well. We'd love to have your feedback. Again, the book is called Brain Health Action Plan, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. But Dr. Teryn Clarke, what an absolute pleasure, and can't wait to continue these conversations.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
I think what I found so fascinating with this conversation with Dr. Clarke was how much overlap there is between taking care of our brain health and the world of financial planning that I live in every day. The expectations that things are going to happen quickly and overnight are just not true. Meaning, just like in the power of compounding, making choices, good choices year after year after year, the same thing goes with our brain health as well. And I think the one key point to reiterate is that you need to give yourself grace when it comes to doing anything from a health standpoint or a financial planning standpoint. There are always going to be setbacks. Are you going to be able to get through those setbacks without giving up? That's where making it easy for you to begin, I think, is a great first step. And I think a lot of the action items that Dr. Clarke gave us, like reducing sugar embracing this time restricted eating, you're going to have to do some trial and error to figure your way out around it. But starting small will have long-term gains, just like from a brain health perspective and a financial planning perspective. If you've enjoyed this conversation, could you do me a favor? Do you know anyone else who would enjoy these types of conversations where we talk about the intersections of our emotional and financial lives? Because if you do, it's actually going to help both of us. Could you share this conversation with someone? They will think you're great because you just gave them this terrific podcast, and it helps me grow my audience. Or you can tell them to go to tamacapital.com. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.